So, never a week goes by without someone talking about literacy and reading in the curriculum. What's the big deal?
Hello, it's Craig and Dave here, and welcome back to At the Chalk Face. And today we're going to be discussing what is the point on reading beyond primary school. Oh, it's such a big thing, isn't it? And if you were watching the one we released last week, we were talking about the GCSE results, and we did focus heavily, didn't we, on the importance of English and maths and literacy. And here we are again. I know we're computer scientists at heart, Dave, but you can't go, can you, an inset day or the start of a new academic year or whatever it is about someone pushing on about reading. Leave it to the English teachers. That's what we're going to get into. As usual, we've got a couple of opinions, haven't we, Dave?
Yeah, never short of a controversy here at the Chalk Face. But it just seems to be never ending, right? Everyone seems to always be banging the drum about reading one way or the other. And I'm going to be deliberately provocative. I'm not saying that I agree with this, right? But let's lay it out. So at the end of the day, if students can access the curriculum, so I'm not talking about those students that have a very low reading age and can't access the curriculum, right? Clearly they need interventions and they need to be able to operate in the world. I get that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those students that have a reading age that allows them to access the curriculum, to read questions in an exam, and to be able to understand them and write answers to those questions and be successful, right? This is what we're talking about. If a student can do that, and they should really have learnt that at primary school, let's face it, then why is reading such a big deal at secondary school? Can't we just sort of put it to bed and focus on knowledge, understanding, and wisdom instead? Why does reading always have to kind of come into the mix?
Ooh, I love it. And before you switched off all the English teachers thinking he doesn't understand, spoiler, we do actually agree reading's really important, but we like to be controversial because we do hear a lot of this as well. And the curriculum is so packed. The curriculum is packed. I'm too busy living my curriculum. English already get more lessons than any other subject, bar probably on par with maths. So do reading for fun over there. Oh, if necessary, I'll throw it into that 10-minute pastoral time if I'm told to by my head of year, but leave it out of my subject. This is what we hear. And I will be honest, I think, if I go back into my career, I was probably in that camp at a few points until I really appreciated the understanding. And there's several things we'll unpack and several reasons why reading beyond primary school and just outside of English is important. I think the biggest one that really highlighted it for me, and I know it's on our list to talk about, is subject-specific terminology, or what we call the vocabulary of a subject. I mean, as soon as you get anything beyond, I mean, even in Key Stage 3, but especially at GCSE, more so at A-level, we end up with hundreds of subject-specific terms or vocabulary, which is unique to that subject. Words which do not crop up in everyday language, but without an understanding of what they are, make the subject that you're trying to get the students to understand so much more difficult to access. But in computer science, we've got algorithms, abstraction, iteration, or repetition. We've got hundreds, and at A level, it's even more. And I think that's really in my career as a computer science teacher, when I was realizing, oh, yeah, okay, there's something about what you can't just ignore this. Now, there's a lot more than this, but maybe you want to focus on the vocabulary one to start with, Dave. What's your thoughts around that and what we're talking about?
Yeah, I agree. It's really important that students frequently bump into things. If they're going to learn something and retain it, they need to bump into it regularly. That's the kind of expression that's going around at the moment, bumping into. Okay. So if we think about some of those words, and you just highlighted a few of them, things like repetition, concatenation, even things like recursion, right? You're not going to be talking about those things in everyday language, but you will possibly read about them. And if you're reading around the subject, then you're definitely going to bump into them, right? And so it's a way of normalizing that language. And if we think about some words like concatenate, for example, if you
Yeah.
understand what concatenate is for programming, then you're off to a good start. So that word has the same meaning in English. Okay.
Yeah.
If you concatenate something in English, it means to join something together. Okay. If you've got a repetition, it means doing something over and over again. Well, the words mean the same thing in English as they do in computer science, but it may well be the first time that a student hears those words if they are not kind of reading, because you don't bump into them necessarily in everyday language. I think that's the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you think about it as well, if you go back to, say, when I was at school and even when I started teaching, we talked an awful lot about sort of reading, writing, and numeracy being the important things, but more and more so now, and it's correct. We're talking about reading, writing, let's get the right word, about oracy and numeracy. And I'm not teaching people to suck eggs, but if you're not sure what oracy is, it just means the ability to express oneself fluently and grammatically in speech. So to be able to, in other words, to engage as a human being in society. Because yes, the way, unless it's a modern foreign language exam, and you're doing your speaking component in front of the old microphone, 99% of how we're assessed is still pen and paper. But out in the real world, it is about engaging with people. And if you don't have that ability to express yourself and to use that language, to interact and explain yourself, you limit your choices and your potential. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, right. Maybe the English teacher or the SLT member in charge of teaching and learning has something here. And this all comes down to being confident with reading, doing it little and often. And we'll talk about reading beyond the spec for the love of the subject and why that helps. And arguably, and we'll probably get onto this as well, why this is becoming increasingly more and more important with the increase in students and adults using AI tools, which may think, well, what's the point in that now? I can use this to summarize that. It's all tied together. So if anything, I'd say it's probably even more important that we don't let this skill drop in young people.
Yeah, but there are other words as well, right? Like architecture, that crops up in computing. But clearly, if you understand what architecture is in the real world, this idea that you're going to plan to build something, then you can bring a little bit of baseline into our subject to think, okay, we're talking about computing architecture in this first topic. Well, that means something about the way we build a computer, right? And it just gives you those foundations, really important. But there are other words as well, Craig, like string. Now, you see, there are some tricky words as well, right? And this could confuse students. So they probably have come across the word string plenty of times in their life by the time they get to year 7, not least because they've probably done all sorts of lovely activities at primary school involving string. So they kind of have a preconceived idea of what a string is. When we then come to computer science and they start learning programming for the first time and we talk about a string, we have to be really careful because they have an understanding of what that word means. And we just assume that when we say string, they kind of know that that means, an array of characters or a set of characters or, a string of characters, right? And it doesn't mean that at all, but you could use, what their current understanding of those words are as a visualization of what it might mean in computer science. And I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but I can imagine a piece of string where we then feed in letters, for example, into that string to make up a word. And it's a visualization of, well, in computer science, a string is, a set of characters, but they've got a visualization there that also opens the door to dual coding.
Yeah. No, indeed. And I mean, I know we were going to get onto this, but the whole point is, if we start with the terminology, you focus on the terminology, you learn it, it leads to, and this is the other reason it's so important, improved comprehension. And of course, improved comprehension, a better grasp of the terminology, all of that leads on to, hopefully, the student being able to do better in the exam, which, let's face it, while we still have a very heavy exam-driven system, is one of the things we want. It's this idea of higher academic performance. The whole thing's tied together, because no one would argue You know, you take away the English teacher and you go to a geography teacher. No one would argue, would you like higher academic performance for your students so they can get better results in the exam? Yes, I would. Well, it ties back, because if they got improved comprehension that comes from a better grasp of the subject terminology, then that will follow through. It's not the only thing, it's part of the recipe. So we've got all of this. And then and then finally leading on from that, of course, you have this idea of increased cultural capital. And that's what I was referring to earlier. If you do all that, this idea of oracy, being able to express yourself confidently in words, in spoken language to other people. So you suddenly realize it really, English as a broad term, but more specifically literacy, numeracy, oracy, those underlying skills, they are fundamentally so important. And we can't just sit there as non-English and maths teachers and roll our eyes when people bang on about the importance of these things in subjects other than English and maths, because they are that important. So I think, one of the questions I had to pose to you, Dave, is reading for pleasure? Okay, let's do this one. Is reading for pleasure just a domain of English? We've answered the question, I guess, that, okay, reading is important, and we talked about terminology and all that. Okay, but reading for pleasure, we'll just do that in English. We'll remember the English lessons. Just read that for pleasure. Open a book and we'll do this, do that. What book are you reading at the moment? All the English teachers have on the door. We don't need to worry about that, though, do we? We can focus on where it's really important, the terminology, the vocab. So is reading for pleasure just a domain of English, or should we be encouraging that in computer science, or indeed any subject?
Yeah, I think we should be encouraging reading for pleasure. It's tricky today because students are expecting to receive knowledge in immediate ways. We think about TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and all these audio visual opportunities that they have these days, and it feels sometimes like reading is something of the past. But it's not, is it? Let's face it. We bump into reasons why we need to read every single day of our lives. And certainly, although we've talked, I've mentioned things like Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, but, to use a computer, you're still going to need to read. And, things on the World Wide Web, for example, web pages, they're still very much a thing, and you still need to be able to read. And reading for pleasure, just as you said, it builds that comprehension, it builds that ability to be able to read other text more easily and fluently, and it builds that cultural capital and enables wisdom. So the more that you're reading, and if you're reading for pleasure, you're doing it because you want to do it, it enables and opens the doors to those other things, getting the comprehension, getting the wisdom, and understanding things that you're going to be taught and how they kind of linked together and build into a much bigger picture that there may not be time to do adequately within a curriculum. And it's probably no surprise that students that do a lot of reading for pleasure actually do perform better in exams. The data is out there. And so it's probably a little bit foolish of us in computing just to pretend that there's not a place for it in our subject as well. And I think if you read around our subject of computing, it's absolutely fascinating. But the challenge is, how do you fit it in, right? There's going to be teachers out there
that was going to be my question to you.
Yeah, yes. Well, I'm going to pose it to you, because there are teachers out there that are going to be thinking, another thing. And the risk is that it just becomes a simple add-on. Maybe you do it once in a while, maybe you undervalue it, you don't really think it's got a place, and so you don't really invest in it. And I've done this loads of times, Craig, with all sorts of things, just bolted it on because I have to bolt it on. I'm not really invested in it, and because I'm not invested in it, it doesn't have any impact, and that's pretty obvious. So what are some of the easy ways that a teacher might be able to, just without changing a huge amount of what they're doing, put a little bit more reading into lessons?
Okay, well, I think it's well established now, retrieval practice, very important parts, should be embedded in schemes of learning, ideally done every lesson at the start. You could simply pull the retrieval practice exercise you're currently doing, or alternate it. For example, if you're one of our followers, I know we bang on a lot about smart revise, but we won't go into that as kind of subject specific. But you could replace every other lesson and take that retrieval activity and give them a paragraph of text with questions that you're going to pose afterwards, forcing the students, therefore, just in those few minutes where they were doing something else, to read the text, digest it, process it, think about their answers. Simple. You've not had to create something in your scheme of learning. It doesn't have to be in every single lesson. If you've got the GCSE, you've got the benefit of 2-3 lessons a week, it could be 2 of those. So you could replace retrieval practice is easy. You could fit that in there, no change needed. What else did I have here? Yeah. So you've got tasks that you do during the lesson. Make a main task require students to read a paragraph before the activity can be undertaken. That sounds like really, really, really old school. But again, we do this already in ours, where we talk about before a task or before a lesson, watching and consuming a video. That's fine. You can still keep that in there, but mix and match it, mix it up. And if you're thinking, well, I need sources of text, there are loads of sources of text out there. I mean, there will be for every subject. Looking at just our subject alone, I know Dave has a copy there as well. This is not ours. We didn't read this. We're not getting any royalties off it. This is an excellent book, How to Learn Computer Science by Alan Harrison. We've actually done a series on it on another channel of ours already, and we brought the author on. An excellent text for students. You only have a quick flick through the contents, the index in here, and you'll see there's loads of stuff relevant to the GCSE, A-level, Key Stage 3 curriculum. You could get students to read a part of that, turn that into an activity. And if you're there thinking, by the way, this is a little plug for you, Alan, you're welcome. If only he did a version for teachers. There you go. There's one for teachers as well. Teaching computer science. We're focusing on the students today. So turn reading into an activity and use a relevant text. Pull out just a paragraph, a page, a chapter for homework, something like that. And this gets into the idea of getting students to read for fun. If you think, what I'm trying to say is, if we don't take this seriously and you just buy a set because it's initiative in SLT, and you buy them all and you give them out and you say, I've done it, I bought the text, I'm giving it to students, nothing's going to happen. That's going to turn into a doorstop or a paperweight. I remember it from university and being given the old reading list. You need to find ways of, initially at least, until students get into the habit of it, of forcing them to engage with the material. So if you make it part of an activity, make it part of a homework, make it part of a reflection or retrieval practice, you don't have to shoehorn it in, because shoehorning in any initiative never worked, did it, Dave?
No, it doesn't. You've got to make it an integral part of what you're doing and believe in why you're doing it. There has to be a why, right? And I just want to kind of carry on the discussion really about how to use this book by Alan Harrison. We're not getting any commission for this, by the way. We get nothing from this. We just think that integrating this into your curriculum is a good idea, and especially at A level. We appreciate it. GCSE, Key Stage 3, probably not quite as easy, but GCSE more tricky. A level, yeah, definitely integrate this into your teaching. And there's all sorts of things that you could do. You could have plenaries where you read with the students, right? They've all got a copy of this book. Read a couple of paragraphs at the end of the lesson with them and sort of discuss the things that you've just read. You don't need to get the students to read aloud. Some of them are going to find that very intimidating, and particularly if reading is a struggle for them, it's going to have the opposite effect. You don't want to be doing that, but you can read it to them and they can follow along, and that's a great thing to do. You could also set this for some homework, maybe even a group homework activity where you say, take this chapter and have a read of it and reflect back to the class. What did you learn from it? What intrigued you? What surprised you? And anything else that you want to sort of bring to the table as evidence that they've gone ahead and read it. So there's all sorts of ways that you could actually use a book like this. And you might be thinking, well, the students could cheat because they could just ask, AI to summarize the text for them, etc. And yeah, of course they could. But in order to have that dialogue back with you in the class, they will have had to have read something, even if it's a summary from AI. It's I guess they could use tools to get it to read aloud and all the rest of it. But we've tried. Another option is to just use AI to generate you a paragraph of text. Okay, so for example, you could just,
Yeah.
a bit of prompting, just ask Copilot or ChatGPT or anything like that, write me one paragraph of text that introduces computer architecture suitable for students at GCSE level with a reading age of up to 12. And just get it to produce that paragraph for you, and then present that to the students in class as part of an activity that you're doing. And they won't have been able to have the opportunity to get AI to help them with something you generated with AI. And final thing I'll say, Craig, is I'm sure there's teachers out there also thinking, well, yeah, but you've completely forgotten that literacy is a barrier for some students, and therefore getting them to
Yeah.
read is an issue. And I just wanted to say, don't make it an issue. There's a couple of things that you can do. The first thing is, if you know that there are tricky words in the paragraph that you're going to give students or in the chapter you're asking them to read, then introduce those words ahead of time, verbalize them with the students so they know how to pronounce those words. So when they read them, they understand what that word is supposed to sound like. You can break that down, and that helps their subject specific vocabulary anyway. And use small texts, right? We're not saying read the whole book. What we're saying is read a paragraph or two of the book. So chunk it down and be really careful of just over scaffolding. The more you believe that students can't engage with something, the more they won't engage with it. So you've kind of got to not over scaffold, have the high expectations, and make reading a part of what you do.
Brilliant. Well, look at that. So is reading important beyond primary school? Yes. Is it the proverb of just the English teacher? No. Should we be encouraging students to read for fun, especially in the day of AI tools? Yes. Trust me, the more you do it, you'll end up with students with more confidence, a better access to your subject vocabulary, higher academic performance, and of course, you're just giving them that greater increased cultural capital. So when they leave your subject and move on, we're making them better, rounded human beings. We can all feel morally great about ourselves. Joking aside, reading is really important, not just for the English teacher. That's us for now. We'll be back soon with another episode from At the Chalk Face.